husbands that I had, 3 of them were good, and 2 were bad. The 3 that I called good were rich and old. Now you're wondering, am I telling you a story about a girl and her sugar daddy? Or am I telling you a soap opera? No, not that. What I just read was the most important quotation written by Geoffrey Chaucer in his book Canterbury Tales. So who was this Geoffrey Chaucer that wrote these weird things and scary for us? Geoffrey Chaucer was one of the most important and most influential writers ever in English literature. He was the father of English poetry, and with this attitude and these words that he wrote, he lived in medieval age, and he wrote like he didn't. So, what is important to say about Geoffrey Chaucer is that he had the best friend called John of Gaunt, and John of Gaunt was important in his life because John of Gaunt was father of Henry IV, who was future king of England. So, when we talk about Geoffrey Chaucer's literature and writing, the most important 3 areas, 3 periods that he wrote were: first one was French, second one was Italian, and third, the most important one, was English. First, French was important because he wrote his poem, the Book of Dutchess, which he dedicated to late wife of John of Gaunt. He was inspired by French poem Roman de la Rosa, which described the purity and the beauty of woman. Second important book in which he wrote was the Italian period, when he traveled to Italy and where he was inspired by the great classical works of Virgil and Dante. An important thing that he wrote in that period was the House of Fame. And the third and the last one is, and the most important one, is the English period, when he came back to England and when he started writing his 2 most famous and most important things he ever wrote, Troilus and Criseyde, and the Canterbury Tales. So Troilus and Criseyde is important because it tells a story about the pure love of God, and that the only thing that is important in life is love of God, or amor Dei. And the only way in this book is that women were presented as evil and as bad, because the main protagonist, Troilus, falls in love with a girl who uses his money, uses his position to get wealth for her. And she destroys his life because he was in love with a person that was not in love with him, and that is something that destroyed him. When he died, he from heaven could see his life, and he could see that the most important thing for every human being is the pure love of God and love for God. And the third and the most important among everything, and the thing that made him famous, is the Canterbury Tales. The thing that I read in the beginning is the quotation from the Canterbury Tales, but Canterbury Tales do have a mixed and very weird narration and plot. So it begins with the prologue, talks about pilgrimages who are going on a pilgrimage to the grave of Thomas Becket. Thomas Becket was a saint. He was a priest who was murdered by his king and his king's knights in his church in Canterbury. So Canterbury Church, where he was buried and where people come to visit his grave. And some people, like wife of that, pardoner, nun, prisoner, beast, they were on their way to see the grave, and the deal among all of them was that every day some of them will tell a story. Every one of them will tell 2 stories, one on their way to Canterbury and one on their way back from Canterbury. This book was never finished, and it ends by the moment they entered Canterbury. So, this book gives us an introduction, prologue, where each of these characters is described, and after that we have a story from each of that persons who were on their way to Canterbury. The most important thing is the style of the figures that he uses in describing his characters. As we could see, this wife of Bath was kind of a hypocrite, and not just her, but every other character described in this book. For example, we have a nun who is supposed to be the wife of God, the pure woman, non-materialistical, the spiritual one. She was not. I mean, in this book. She was a woman who was rich, she had a lot of money, she had a lot of gold, she had the greatest materials on her clothes. She was attractive, she used lipstick, and she did everything so the male population should fall in love with her, something that the nun should not do ever. So he presented people the way we would never expect them to be, but that what we would never expect them to be are what they truly are, presented in this book by Geoffrey Chaucer. He wrote in medieval ages, but he wrote like he lived in Renaissance. He gave us clear psychological inner state and inner description of all his characters, and he gave us true, real description of them. This description of characters in which they mock and make fun of them is called estate satire, and the most important estate satire is actually created and written and used in the Canterbury Tales. Another important style of figure that we have in Geoffrey Chaucer's books, especially in Canterbury Tales, is Reverdies. Reverdies were old French poems that describe the beginning of the year and the beginning of the summer. That the Reverdies used the description of spring, and the spring presented new beginning, new waking, new life, and we have it because in prologue starts with description of spring and description of nature which was in the spring. So, which means that this thing that this is described here is the new beginning for all these sinners, because even though they're on their way to see a saint, they were truly sinners inside. That would be all. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe.